welcome to our next Navigating Through Volatility webinar series by APICS Inland Empire, sponsored by LMA Consulting. We're really excited today to have Veronica Contreras talking about the facts of manufacturing in Mexico. Veronica is a seasoned global business consultant with 18 years of experience working with C-level executives for U.S. manufacturing companies in the evaluation process of setting up their operations in Mexico. She's an expert in facilitating the startup process in a Maquiladora for foreign national companies through the Shelter program. And she's worked directly on over 75 expansion projects during her tenure at Co-Production International, a leading administrative services company in Tijuana, Tecate, and broader Baja California border region, and has led the expansion projects for notable companies such as Icon Aircraft, Ronan Newtone, Smiths Interconnect, and others. So Veronica's an expert on manufacturing in Mexico. And as we see this pandemic take shape, it'll be interesting to see what all happens as we emerge on the other side. And certainly one thing that all of my clients are saying and our APICS members are saying is that folks are looking more at their sourcing network and determining if they want to move back to the US and near the US so that they can produce production closer to customers if they're located here. So this should be a really timely topic. So with that said, Veronica, I will turn it over to you. Oh, and one other thing. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box or the Q&A, and I will let Veronica know as we go along. So thank you, Veronica.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And the APEX Inland Empire chapter, I'm really excited to join your series on volatility. I think you've done a tremendous job in addressing the different concerns of the manufacturers in your area. I was listening to the one by John Tulak, international attorney, and I think that's a perfect segue for what I want to speak with all of you today. He did a great job of presenting the global perspective, and I really want to jump into the Mexico part, which is where my experience comes from. So in the recent events in the last 12 months, we've all experienced, or at least the customers and the clients that I serve have started experiencing a snowball effect. And now with the COVID crisis, this has turned into some manufacturing industries into a full-blown avalanche. At least that's the way it feels. Leading many manufacturers working on implementing their second source strategies, which I'm sure you're highly involved in, Lisa, and developing alternative plans for manufacturers who are leading them back to Mexico, like you said. So this all started back with the China trade war last year. We had companies who were already rethinking their relationship with manufacturing in China. And then the USMCA, which was finally signed this year, January 29th. That was a big, big day for us. We finally put to bed something that was just kind of sitting there, and that we needed that confirmation that the US was going to move forward with this trade agreement. So we finally had our US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement put into place. So these companies who were lingering with the China trade war, they started now working on their strategies of solidifying their footprints in Mexico. And now with COVID, we could basically say this is the final straw. And we're starting to see those companies that have been operating in China or other locations, they are quickly activating their plans, and they're moving beyond the consideration stages into moving supply chains to Mexico and other Latin American countries. So Mexico is well positioned to take on the support and to support new businesses that are coming in. It's less expensive than China. And really the topic of today is the proximity to the US. It's ideal because of the location and the labor force and experiences that Mexico has to offer. In regards to cost, Mexico is about 20% lower cost than some locations in China when it comes to labor alone. And then when we factor in the landed costs, Mexico has definitely taken a clear advantage. Mexican labor costs have been fairly steady over the last couple of years.
Veronica, are you, I just want to make sure, are you going through the slides or are you still on the front page?
I'm still on the front page.
Okay, just want to make sure because sometimes they don't move when we think they are. No problem, keep going.
So the Mexican labor costs have climbed, but steadily, and we have really good traction that it's very predictable. The combination of the low costs have helped make Mexico one of the world's leading nations. Mexico has become a major hub for electronics, medical devices, the aerospace, and automotive industry. You've all heard it, you've seen it on the news. When we were in negotiations with the USMCA, this was big news. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I want to just give you some perspective of what that means in relations to Mexico. It's a big country, and there can be some confusion on who's doing what and why. So today
So Veronica, I don't know if I should interrupt you before you even get started with your slide presentation, but we have a few questions. Should I
go for it.
Now?
I'm really curious. I'm hearing what others are what's on their mind.
So they want to know what has changed because of the USMCA compared to NAFTA is one question.
That's a great question. And if I were to do broad strokes, because I could have an hour presentation on that, not much has changed. It's all been in favor of the three countries. The items that were addressed specifically were in IT, or not IT, in technology and protection of technology, transfer of information with emails, etc., making sure that those data protections are stronger and in place, because when NAFTA was created, obviously we didn't have the internet and email, at least it wasn't available to the masses. So a lot of language was put into that. Also, when we talk about international trade, there was a lot of facilitation in working within the three countries. So being able to better process information and really create more of an alignment so that we can import and export between the three countries, US, Mexico, and Canada, with more ease. So a lot of information was put into that. There was some agricultural protections in there. But for the manufacturing industry, as really big picture, it only made things better. There was no anything that has affected us in the way that we operate. So it just made us more.
Makes sense. We have a lot of questions here. So you mentioned that manufacturing in Mexico is cheaper than China. Could you break that down a little further? Perhaps you'll do this later in the presentation, they say.
Well, I will provide you with the cost of Mexico. And for those of you that are manufacturing in China, we could kind of do a one-on-one and I could provide you with more information. But yes, we'll talk about the labor costs of Mexico, and the clients that I work with who operate in China. China's a big country, so obviously, it's hard to compare to all parts of China, but the ones that are heavily known for manufacturing, the data that we get back is always about 20%, meaning that Mexico right now is at about $3.20, let's say, for a direct employee, for a direct worker. Whereas in China, I think that number could be $1.50, depending on the exchange rates. So, but I think that might be net. So.
Yeah, no, that gives us some context, and obviously that's just one cost. There's a lot of other costs that add up that will definitely put that over the top, because U.S. is even in parity with China for non-commodity products. So clearly we pay more than $3.20.
It's all about the landed costs, right, Lisa?
That's right. That's right, exactly. So and we just have somebody making a comment that she's an engineer that suffered the migration of all the manufacturing companies settled in the northern part of Mexico back in the late 90s. So, she said, how is the current state, Mexico state, prepared to start seeing all these companies back from China? The current president is against foreign investment. I'd like to know the struggle of migrating to Mexico. So you might address this later, it's fine, but if not, I wanted to read you the question that's here.
We'll definitely address some of that, and actually that brings a good point. So this migration of companies to Mexico is not new. So much like the U.S. Lost a lot of jobs to China, Mexico lost a lot of jobs to China. We lost a lot of business that when China joined the World Trade Organization, we saw a bunch of companies leave. And, you know, we also suffered. What we've seen over the last, 15, 20 years is leveling out. Companies really figuring out where they should manufacture and why. And I have noticed that companies are no longer just chasing the cheap labor rates, but it has to make sense in connection to their distribution. Where is their client base? And why are you manufacturing, where you're manufacturing, who are you serving? So the trends that we're seeing now is companies who are set up in, let's say, China for the Chinese market. And the companies that are manufacturing in Mexico are manufacturing for the North American market or the Americas, you know, depending on the industry. But yes, we'll talk more about that.
Okay. Well, we'll let you keep going, and then I'll come back with questions later. But it seems like your topic is quite popular.
I'm glad. I'm excited, and I'm enjoying the questions. So I didn't really, you know, do a million slides because it's probably a time that others would enjoy the slides. But what we're going to talk about in this presentation is I want to focus on the human capital, you know, and how Mexico is prepared from the manufacturing perspective. I want to give you some insight on who's there, what industries are there, and why they are there, and what locations are at. I'm going to focus a lot about the proximity and the location, even to where you all are probably sitting at today, which is, I'm assuming there's a lot of Southern California companies that are on the webinar. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the costs. So we'll see how we do with time. And of course, feel free to ask your questions.
Yep, keep them coming because I can always intersperse them as we go.
Okay. Awesome. So I just want to introduce my partner, which is Co-Production International. I represent them and have for the last 19 years. They are their role is really to help execute any companies who are looking to set up in Mexico. My role is to prepare these companies with all of the information and putting the project together, and then co-production executes. So we've got a team of about 80 professionals in legal, accounting, human resources, environmental health and safety, import, export, and legal. And we basically make this happen for our customers in Mexico. We've set up over 200 companies over the last 40 years. So I want to share a little bit with you about my story. I think it's going to play with maybe the story of some of you that are out there, and maybe for you companies that might be considering Mexico. This is why I love what I do and why I've stayed in manufacturing, working with US companies who are looking to set up in Mexico for the first time. This is some pictures of me back in 2006. I was working with this electronics company. They're in the aerospace industry, but they do electronics. It's a $4 billion company. And although not all companies huge this way will work with an outsourcing partner, they did in our case. They provide advanced technologies that make the world safer and healthier and more productive. They had locations all over the world, but I think it really plays to our discussion today. So they had operations in Europe and in China and in the US. And they opted to set up a facility in Tijuana because of the proximity to just one of their locations in California. So they had a couple of manufacturing operations in California as well as the East Coast. And they picked Tijuana to set up their facility because of the ease of moving product back and forth from the US-Mexico border, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later on today. So really, you know, oftentimes we might overcomplicate something that is so simple. And just the ability of moving product back and forth in one day versus, Lisa, how many days on the water if you're moving in stuff from China?
Yeah, usually it's, well, most of my clients can expect to wait 2 to 3 months, but it's not all on the water, but basically that's the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, that alone is really one of the key drivers on why Mexico has made sense and continues to make sense for, especially for Southern California manufacturers. So in this case, my team and I help navigate through the uncertainties of hiring their workforce and figuring out the right salary structures. We help identify the right benefit plans, as well as identifying where they should be set up in Mexico in connection to the type of labor force that they were looking for. They had a lot of engineers that were going to be on staff, so that was important to evaluate when we were looking at the cities and the size of the cities, and could they support that type of labor and the type of skill sets that they were going to be doing. We also help manage their leasehold improvements. So when you're looking at setting up a plant somewhere, you got to look at who are you going to work with and the contractors that are going to come in and build your building. We also help them handle all of the import-export stuff, getting equipment into Mexico and managing through all the legalities of getting things in there, as well as the environmental health and safety aspects of starting up a plant in Mexico. So this whole process took about 9 months. It was a greenfield project, as you can see in this picture here. There was, it was just a bunch of hills. And over the 9 months, we were able to not only get all of their permits in place, but we were able to hire their initial workforce and get them started. So this year we celebrate their 15th year anniversary. It's one of my most proud projects that I'm very proud of. We have over 500 employees and they continue as our administrative partner. It's experiences like these that inspire me to continue helping others on their path to manufacturing in Mexico. And I've got a lot of these stories. So in order to talk about where we are going, I think we should talk about some just basic language that everyone should be aware of. So what is a maquiladora? That's a big term. It's been around since the 80s. It's evolved. The maquiladora program has evolved, but it's still really built to aim for an investment. It's there to create jobs for the Mexican employees in the country. It's there to foster industrialization and boost Mexico's economy in connection with the US. It offers foreign manufacturers a favorable duty, or in the case of the NAFTA countries or the USMCA countries, a tariff-free duty environment. So this is key. This is really the whole point, not the whole point, but it's one of the biggest advantages of operating in Mexico, is having this maquiladora program in place. So the typical scenario that we see is a US company who sets up in Mexico under the maquiladora concept. It's no longer called the maquiladora permit, but it's the concept. And they set up a facility and they hire employees, and everything that's manufactured in this facility is then exported out of Mexico, essentially, just to make things a little easy. Any questions, Lisa, or should we continue?
Sure. Yes, we do have some. So, there's one here. What is the % of manufacturing that can still happen in Mexico, but is still claimed to be as made in the USA? Do you know that?
That's a good question. It all comes down to country of origin and raw materials. So it can be, if your raw materials are anywhere in the US or are in the NAFTA countries, then I don't know. I don't have that answer on the top of my head.
That's okay. Maybe you could just, provide it to me, and I will, share it with the information. And one's asking, are you familiar with the Tijuana EDC?
Yes, of course, of course.
Okay.
We're members of the Tijuana EDC, and they're an economic development group there in Tijuana.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then so what were the three industries you said were strong in Mexico?
Okay, so we have a lot of manufacturing in Mexico, and actually that's a great segue into the slide that I'm showing here.
Great.
So over 5,000 foreign manufacturers operating in Mexico, right? And the top industries are, I'm just gonna, because there's so much that goes on there, just to keep it simple, we've got aerospace, automotive, electronics, medical devices. That's what I'm gonna focus on just for today to keep things simple. But this map right here, I wanna introduce some of the zones because even for myself, I'm calling in from San Diego, and I work really out of the Baja California state, which is the one neighbor to California. However, there's manufacturing through all of Mexico. So I think it's really important to highlight how it all breaks down. So Baja California is the state of California, and then we've got all of these border states. All the way down to Tamaulipas, which is bordering Texas, and then here we've got, California. So all of these borders, we call these the border zones, okay, which includes Sonora, Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo León, and Tamaulipas, all the way up to this point. And then we have the El Bajío industrial hubs, which is, you hear a lot of this as well. There was a lot of articles on this during the USMCA trade negotiation. This is Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Aguascalientes, Guanajuato. So all these areas here are the El Bajío industrial hubs. And then we've got, Jalisco, Guadalajara over here, and then Puebla down here, which is known for the automotive. So now I'm going to go over these zones again, but I'm going to break it down into the industries that you'll find. So along the border, you're going to find aerospace, a lot of aerospace, and you're going to find a lot of automotive going on here, as well as in here, the El Bajío industrial hubs. So that's both aerospace and automotive here and here. You're going to find electronics and medical devices. A lot of the concentration is here in Baja California. So Tijuana is one of the 3 border cities in California. We've got Tijuana, Tecate, and Mexicali. And those are the border cities. Every single state has their own border cities as well. But we're going to be focusing on this area for today's talk because of the proximity to where we are today. So you're going to notice that Baja California has 916 factories operating out of there. Tijuana has 687, and this number is constantly changing. So I'm sure it's a couple plus more than that today. So what you'll notice in relation to the rest of the locations is that Tijuana has the largest concentration of factories in all of Mexico. And the reason for that is because of, again, the proximity and location. So a client of ours, for example, who is in Long Beach can import raw materials into its facility in Tijuana, make its, turn around, pick up final product, and deliver it back to its facility in Long Beach, all within the same day. And that is a game changer. That is the reason.
Significant.
Yeah. that it's been so successful. I mean, you know, I have clients constantly moving back and forth that way in that ease. So now that we've talked, now that I've introduced Mexico's landscape, you know, it would be impossible to try to cover everything in one webinar.
True.
But as much as I would love to.
I do have two questions though about related to that, and that's okay. It looks like you went to this slide is fine too. So there was two people who had questions about specific industries. One is like infant products, baby stuff that they make in China currently. Do you know if this is a strong industry in Mexico, or I guess they're probably asking, could it be?
Yeah, for sure. The electronics, for just depending on what it is, if it's plastics or if it has electronics.
No, this is a baby stuff.
Baby stuff.
Yeah, like infant products.
So if it's plastics, for example, you know.
Well, that's true. You're right. I guess it depends on the product. Good point. Yeah. Sorry.
But to play on that, we are going to talk a lot about the medical device industry, which I would put baby products in that category in regards to sensitivity and quality standards and, you know, level of expectations. So I think I'll be able to maybe shed some light in regards to that.
No, that's great. And then the other question related to this general topic is, do you think that there'll be electronic component manufacturing in the Tijuana, Tecate area, not EMS, but actual manufacturing of PCB level components?
Oh yeah, that's already happening. There's a lot. Electronics is our oldest and more maturest industry. We did lose a lot of it to China, but there's a lot of it that's come back. What's really interesting about Tijuana, and that's a perfect segue into my next slide. So we have 120 companies in electronics in Tijuana. We have over 40,000 employees supporting this industry. So companies like, we're known as the TV capital of the world. But beyond that, what I have found most interesting in the last 7 to 10 years is a lot of the companies that set up their facilities, most companies that set up Maquiladoras are doing it for themselves. What I mean by that is a company like Samsung is setting up a factory to build their own TVs. They're not setting it up because they're not a contract manufacturer. However, what we have seen, the trend has been a lot of these companies have turned into contract manufacturers because of their capacity. And I have found that extremely interesting to see even, you know, medical device companies who have set up for themselves to make their own products have evolved because of this extra capacity that they have in Tijuana. Yeah, I know. I find that extremely fascinating to see, to have seen that evolve over the last couple of years. So what we're going to find in Tijuana in regards to the television community or electronics, for example, you know, a nice tidbit here is companies like Samsung and Foxconn and Panasonic and Plantronics and SMK, they all have operations in Tijuana. These are common companies that, you know, also have operations in China. However, when we talk about the flat screen TVs that are being made, all of them are primarily made in Tijuana. That's what we're known for. So Vizio, some of you might be familiar with that brand, they moved all of their manufacturing hub from Asia to Tijuana due to the consistent rise of the manufacturing costs that they saw in China. And like that, we've seen a lot of trends happening. Next, we've got the automotive industry. So for those of you that are not aware, we have a huge Toyota plant in Tijuana. The Toyota truck, the entire truck is made in Tijuana. Then we've got the medical device industries, which is the hottest industry in our area right now. It's the fastest growing. One of my favorite facts is of the top 10 medical device companies in the world, 6 have a factory in Tijuana. Medtronics, Philips, BD, Cardinal Health, Stryker, and Baxter all have facilities there in Tijuana. So I think that's extremely fascinating. I mean, you really can't get more sensitive when it comes to manufacturing than medical devices. And Tijuana is the #1 choice for any medical device manufacturer in the world. We make pacemakers and their batteries. We make lenses, wheelchairs, catheters, defibrillators, urinary bags, electronic thermometers, and much, much more. So you can only imagine during this crisis, what I've seen personally is a lot of these medical device manufacturers have quickly modified their product lines to support the U.S. efforts for medical products.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask. So they're considered essential and are keeping going, I guess is the right way to put that. Okay, good. Glad to hear that.
Yes, but this really plays, you know, to the very tight relationship we have with these two countries and the importance of that. Whereas I think in its moment, China was no longer exporting any medical device products. And I don't have that as a fact, that's just what I heard. Tijuana has not stopped the pace and continue to support the US during this epidemic. So medical devices manufactured in Baja California are produced under the ISO 13485 International Quality Standards. I think that's really important to mention. There's a medical cluster that's extremely strong and important in the area. So safety and quality is not negotiable when it comes to the medical device industry of Mexico, specifically in Tijuana. And then next, I want to just finish off with the aerospace industry. We had major international US defense contractors like Lockheed Martin and Delphi who set up operations in the early 80s and 90s in Mexico, but it hasn't stopped and it's continued to grow. Companies like Eaton Aerospace and Smiths Interconnect, Icon Aircraft have all become part of Tijuana's important ecosystem when it comes to manufacturing. So why did all of these industrial sectors select Tijuana? I'm sure that's a question a lot of you might be asking yourselves when it comes to, you know, all over the world, why Tijuana? Well, proximity. Proximity is obviously the key. Again, the theme of today's presentation. So you've heard me tell you some stories about how quickly we can bring product in and out of Mexico. Tijuana is the most northern city of all the borders. Of all the borders of Mexico. It's the most accessible. It's the sixth. We have two important ports that we utilize. We have the Port of Long Beach, which means that we can collect product from the Port of Long Beach, bring it inbound straight into Mexico, provide that to the Mexican plant to start manufacturing the product, and then we can deliver it back out either through the land ports in Tijuana or through the ports on water. So besides the Port of Long Beach, we also have the Port of Ensenada. And the Port of Ensenada is a city that's about 2 hours south of Tijuana. And we have a major port there that is servicing the Baja California region, which is very important. So we're bringing, now exclusively, we have clients who are just utilizing the Port of Ensenada and no longer using the Port of Long Beach because there's really no point. So I think that's important to know and understand. So we are able to offer just-in-time delivery to distributors and customers, providing that gives Tijuana the competitive edge, or any of the Baja California border cities, a competitive edge over any other location in Mexico. Manufacturers can ship in and out of Tijuana via sea, air, and highway. We also have an international airport in Tijuana. So the hubs, like I mentioned, Mexico has really developed itself as a medical hub, Tijuana specifically. So this takes us to our third reason on why manufacturers have chosen Tijuana as their top choice for manufacturing in Mexico, and that's the human capital. So let me move the slide here. So Tijuana is a large city, for those of you who have never visited. Its population is about 2 million. So it's as big as San Diego County. The people of Tijuana are different than other locations in Mexico because of the proximity to the border. So Tijuana is butted up right next to San Diego County. I'm in my home in San Diego, and it would take me about 15 minutes to go into Mexico, into Tijuana, from where I'm at. So with that kind of proximity, there's a lot. It's the largest land border crossing in the world. That's where the most people are crossing daily. So what you find is a very binational labor force in Tijuana. People who speak English, it's very easy for us to hire engineers and people in management positions who speak the language. And what I love is that it's not just American influence. I mean, Tijuana is sprinkled with a global perspective. So you have companies from all over the world who are operating in this city. So if I hire a quality engineer, or planner buyer, he's probably worked for an American company, a European company, Chinese company, and maybe a Japanese company. So he's had influences from all over the world, which I find extremely interesting about Tijuana. So in regards to education.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I have several questions here. I don't know though if I should. When should you keep going and come to a break and then I'll ask them? What do you think?
No, we can ask them. Maybe.
Okay. All right. So they relate. Some of them relate to Tijuana, so I'll talk to those first. So is Tijuana's part of the U.S. electrical power? Is Tijuana part of the U.S. electrical power grid?
Oh, that's a good question. I believe it is, and I know that we've got a lot of the farms out there that are supplying the U.S. and vice versa. So I would say yes. The answer is yes to that.
Okay. All right. Good. And if you find out anything else, let me know. And then, what is the average border crossing times from Tijuana, and how many lanes they're asking?
Ooh, I don't know the number of lanes, but there's a very important program that we have in the border that I pertain to, that I belong to, and anyone who's going to be doing any cross-border business would definitely want to participate in this program. It's called the Sentry program, or for you that travel on a global basis, it's also the Global Entry program. So you might use this when you're traveling abroad, but you definitely participate in this program. So my average wait when I'm coming from Tijuana into the US is about 10 to 15 minutes because I belong to this program. If you do not belong to the program, then the border wait can be an hour on average. Now that's for pedestrians, for us crossing back and forth. Obviously the commercial border, which is where all the freight is moving product back and forth, that's a whole separate lane, and that just depends on the season, the border crossing. But I could tell you we had a client importing equipment this week, and within an hour and a half, their equipment had crossed the border and was in their facility.
And what did you say? They crossed the border and how fast?
And so they crossed the border, went through customs inspection and had their equipment in their facility within an hour and a half.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. Okay, so let's see. There's a question too about back to the electronic components. What kinds of electronic components? MLCC, chip resistors, diodes.
Should I continue?
Yeah, that's fine. And then we can come back to that. Can you hear me? Veronica?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I lost you.
No problem. Sorry, I was asking you another question, but I muted and unmuted myself and it seemed to fix it. So they were asking about what types of electronic components, like MLCCs, chip resistors, etc. So I heard that Signify's plant in TJ has been shut down for weeks. When do you think it'll reopen?
Oh, I can't talk about specifics. We've got, like
Yeah,
I mentioned, there's probably, we have 600 plants in Tijuana, so I don't know all of them. And because of the COVID situation, which has been very serious, Mexico has taken it very serious. There has been voluntary shutdowns where companies have shut their plants down in Tijuana specifically, but all over Mexico, just like we have in California, so that we can abide by the COVID rules. So if the plant was shut down, and it's because related to the COVID, which it probably is,
right.
the voluntary shutdowns are going to go through the month of May. So May 30th is the expectation date for everything to end. And then by June, we hope to open everything back up.
Okay, great, thank you. Is it okay if I ask you some more? Because we have a pile up still.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what are the implications of, in quotes, the wall on imports from Mexico, if any?
The wall?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. No, no implications. So the
this is
wall is,
NAFTA, right? I mean, or whatever, the USMCA, right?
yeah.
Addresses that.
So will the wall have, let me just rephrase the question. Will the wall have any implications in regards to the commercial border crossing? Is that
Yeah,
what?
that's the question.
Okay, so no, the commercial border crossing is business as usual. We go through both US and Mexican customs so that we can import and export equipment and raw materials. The wall there's already two walls for those of you who aren't aware, who are probably not aware, but we already have two walls, and that's to try to keep the pedestrians, the Mexicans or people from other Latin American countries out of the US. So there's already existing walls. And I think they're going to
Got it.
build the third. So this would be the third wall in our community if and when it ever goes up. So it really has no impact.
Got it. All right. The current government is promoting that people shouldn't continue to prepare themselves, like meaning they should stop studying. Shall we be concerned about the quality of products manufactured in Mexico that they may decrease over time?
So that we're getting, I think that's more into the politics,
True. I think it
which,
is.
yeah, which, I do want to talk, that is more, that's the politics, and that's for the people who don't have access to education, etc. That's where there is an investment going in, and that, I think there's been a lot of sides to that. What I can speak on, and I think is more relevant to this manufacturing community and perspective, is what Mexico does really well is produce really good, intelligent engineers. It graduates over 115,000 engineers and technicians per year. There's over 51 universities and 35 technical schools in Baja California alone. So there's actually a lot of schools that are not going to go away. Example, a company that we set up in Tecate by the name of Veronica. They have a beautiful linkage program between the university and the company. There's a school out there by the name of UABC, and UABC, it's a university that those engineers, when they graduate, they get fed straight into the manufacturing facility, just like we have here in the US. Well, I have a beautiful story about that. For Brown, when we were starting up the plant 11 years ago, the first hire was a young man who was still going to school and still finishing up his engineering degree. And when he finished, after a couple of years, he went in and started working for this company. Well, 10 years later, he has basically graduated and now works for the corporate at a very high level. And his future is beautiful, and it's just a representation of the type of engineers and people that come out of the universities in Mexico. And like that, I have several stories that play to that. So I'm not concerned and wouldn't be concerned that For those students that have the ability to study and can study, Mexico has the infrastructure and will continue supporting them.
Got it. Well, and actually that is a good segue back to the human capital section here. So I'll let you keep going because I don't want to, and then we'll circle back to some of the other questions.
Awesome. So we talked about the human capital. We talked about a lot of these statistics and the linkage program. I gave you a good example of that with Bro Newton. So I think what we're going to do is kind of segue straight into the costs. So when we're looking at the cost, which is obviously on everyone's mind when considering foreign manufacturing or setting up a plant in Mexico, this is a good example of a company with 70 employees, and we compare just on labor alone, a company could save about $2 million a year. And I know every California company always tells me $19 is too low when I use the comparison, but you know, this can apply to other companies around the United States. Next, I'm going to show you a slide on salaries, the Mexican salaries. So we started this off. I keep losing my mouse. So this is I've been working on this data point for a long time. And, you know, when we have an entry level employee, meaning somebody who's just getting hired day one, we call them a direct employee, just like in the US, their salary might be a quarter or, you know, maybe around $2, $2.99 when they first start. But once we average them out for the year, and we, you know, et cetera, you're looking at the cost for a direct worker to be about $3.40. Now this is fully burdened. So this includes the taxes and the benefits for this direct employee, which I think could be a little shocking sometimes, but it's the reality. And then when we look at the indirect workers, and these are, you know, maybe our supervisors and some engineers, et cetera, a good number is about $15.06 per hour. Now this is per US dollar. This is for year one. You know, we have to incorporate our increases for every year, et cetera. But these are good numbers to have a good understanding in Mexico. It's important to point out that the higher the skill set and the higher the position, the closer it aligns to US salaries. And that could be shocking for a lot of companies. But our plant managers and our very experienced high-level engineers might be getting paid pretty close to what you're paying your US people for. So that's just something to keep in mind. And here's a nice, go ahead, Lisa.
No, keep going, because I was going to ask you about in comparison to China, but that might be coming, or you could just speak to it as you, after this, so that's no problem.
Okay, so this is just a quick comparison. This, obviously this has a lot of detail to it and difficult to try to tackle in this presentation, but for a company has 100 employees, who's in about a 35,000 square foot facility, you can expect to pay about $2.2 million for your facility in Mexico. So I think this is really important because Mexico is, you know, it has hard costs, right? So companies who are smaller really have to take that into consideration when evaluating setting up an operation somewhere else, because you still have rent, you have electricity costs, you're going to have hard costs, you're going to have salaries to pay, and if you're shifting things or you're expanding, you have to take all that into consideration, because overhead costs are overhead costs, and those are fixed no matter where you go. So I think it's always important to point that out. But you still will see, I loaded everything in here into this $9.22 rate. So what's burdened in that is your rent, your utilities, your salaries, your freight going back and forth, your brokerage fees, your administrative fees for human resources and accounting and all the personnel that's going to run that plant. So that's a good number when looking at, you know, how competitive is Mexico to China or the US? And to answer your question, Lisa, I think we would go back on this slide here. And I think China's probably about $1.80, maybe $2.50 last time that I had somebody, you know, give me some information on that so that we could compare. But that's salary only, right? So, I mean, I think the exercise that would probably be worthwhile is what's our landed cost, China versus Mexico. And I don't have that, but that would be a good analysis for me to work on for next time.
Yep, that would be very interesting.
So what are some of the other costs that you need to consider when evaluating Mexico? You got to think about your capital equipment and your raw materials, obviously. Tenant improvements, that's for those of you that aren't familiar with that term. It's all of the improvements that go into the facility, your transformers and your electrical drops, and you know, if you need natural gas, all the infrastructure that goes into the building. Any IT expenses, that could be as $5,000 up to $100,000 depending on the company you work for, and that's all the phones and the computers and security connections. Just to put you all at ease, Tijuana has all the infrastructure and all of the local vendors to support this type of need and requirement. Tijuana is actually very well known for its call center industry because of the bilingual workforce. So we have all the infrastructure we need when it comes to IT. And any training and travel expenses are just good line items to have. So for any of you that are considering this, I'm happy to schedule a call with you and put together a cost model that could reflect your company's needs in Mexico. So now we've talked a lot about proximity. I think that's really clear. So it's no longer a question if Mexico can work. It's real. I think Tijuana specifically takes a clear leadership position, but there are other amazing border towns that I didn't talk about today, but Tecate is really close to my heart. Back 19 years ago, that's where I really started setting up a lot of business and continue to do so. Mexicali is an amazing city as well. So it really just depends on what you want to do, who you want to do it with, why do you want to set up in Mexico, and what your needs are. And those are all areas that I'd be happy to support anybody with if they have any questions on. So we talked about industry experience and proximity, we talked about human capital, and we talked a little bit about cost. So we're basically getting to the point, what comes next? So if you're a company that's interested in actually moving forward and setting up an operation in Mexico, you have the ability of hiring your attorney and your accountant and, you know, figuring all it out, right? You can determine what you need and get started. The permits would probably take you about 1.5 years to get things up and going. And Tijuana and Mexico is a great choice. However, running into these types of situations over and over again, that was the reason that our company was founded over 40 years ago, was to provide a solution for these headaches of having to figure out who to hire and where to set up and what does the competitive labor market look like, and how am I, the new guy in town, going to go in and make sure that I'm following the laws properly and making sure that I'm importing correctly and that I understand the accounting side of working in a foreign country. So all of these different questions start to pop up, and we decided to put this company together to find that solution. So what we do is basically that we handhold our clients in determining how to put together a plan for Mexico and execute it. So we have experienced people who do all of this work for you in all of the areas, and we get you started. And we do all this under a program called the Shelter Program. And the Shelter Program basically guarantees the entire process of manufacturing in Mexico. It's a US contract, so you don't even have to sign a contract with a Mexican company. you sign with the US company, and basically this relationship provides you with full control of your own manufacturing facility without having the legal responsibilities for it. And I really have come to my end, Lisa, and I think we've got
Okay, well, I have several questions for you, and then we can always do some afterwards if we need to wrap up. But one of the questions that I'm looking for general themes here, but one of the questions is, since the current leadership government in Mexico is not, it doesn't sound like it's terribly supportive to business, what kind of issues do you think we'll run into in terms of, if we're thinking about moving manufacturing to Mexico from China or wherever?
Yes, I mean, that is a concern, and that's a fair question. And really what we're seeing in practice is we're not getting a ton of love from the president, but he's also not stopping us from doing business. So definitely working with a company like ours, like co-production, has really facilitated the process because we already have everything in place. For a new company starting off and wishing to set up their own Mexican company and navigate through things on their own, it is going to be a little bit more challenging, just because the ability to get new permits, etc. They've reduced the amount of people that are working in these different departments that facilitate the permits. So it just takes a lot longer than it did before.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I'm thinking that this coronavirus is like changing things pretty broadly. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. I think those countries and locations that are willing to move fast may just gain some significant ground. So we'll see how it goes.
Definitely.
The U.S.
Seeing right now is finally this week I saw people picking up the project and taking advantage of this 1 month of downtime, because it's interesting. People are, we might spend months thinking about these projects, but the reality is when we're ready to go, we're ready to go now, and everything takes time. Reviewing a lease agreement alone can take 2 to 3 months. Finding the right site, planning the benefit structures, all of that takes time. And that's the one thing we do have right now. Not all of us, because some of us are crazy, like you were saying, super busy. But, for those that are just have a little bit more time, this is the time for planning.
Yep, very true. Let's see here. I'm going to look through and see if there's any other important themes here. Let's see. Is the government aligned with ITAR regulations?
It is, actually. I have facilities that I have set up that are ITAR compliant.
Okay, I thought so. And how about ISO? Are the manufacturing standards ISO related?
Sure,
Rated,
for sure. Yeah, even with the Department of Defense, all of that is, the auditors are accustomed to going into Mexico and auditing the facilities.
What about the currency implications? How stable is the peso versus the dollar and the euro and the pound?
It's been, so when I started about 19 years ago, we were at about 12, maybe 11 pesos to the US dollar. Today, we're at about 19, maybe 18 to 19. I haven't looked in a couple of weeks to the US dollar. So when we had the recession, the peso jumped up and it's been stable since then. So all of this being favorable to US companies, obviously. So I think the average for this year, what was forecasted was to reach 21 pesos to the US dollar. This was pre-COVID. So right now, I'm not sure what what the economists are saying for the new forecast for this year, but I would expect it to maybe go up to 22, which is very favorable for foreign investment.
Actually, that you bring up a good point. Maybe I will see if I can have some currency specialists. Maybe I'll look at putting one of those together on a webinar, because that'll be interesting to see how this all goes. Okay, let's see. Does the product coming to Mexico from the US, like from Long Beach, have to pay US customs, or is there a system to bypass and only pay Mexican import duty taxes?
Yeah, for sure. So if we're bringing, let's say, components from China, raw material from China, and it lands in the port of Long Beach, we would bring it inbound straight into Mexico. So it's as if it never landed in the US, even though it is used, it's being transported through the US and it's sealed and it's taken straight to the Mexican border, US-Mexican border, and then at that point it enters Mexico. So we circumvent the US completely.
I see. Okay. How about the crime rate? I wondered about this too. Is it a deterrent? Have you seen any shifts in like people looking at taking advantage of the Maquiladora concept, like in terms of a slowdown in terms of the crime, or is it not slowing that down?
No. So the crime that most people are concerned with is the cartel crime. Let me just put some facts out for you. There's 40 million people that cross San Diego and Tijuana each year. 40 million people. So our crime problems are very much within themselves. It's within the cartels. It's not something that I see. I drive into the furthest, most desolate place in Tijuana. It takes me about 25 minutes to get there. So I drive in my car by myself. I drive an Infinity, and I drive through all of Tijuana. And up to this point, I've never had any issues, and I've never seen anything. So I'm not even aware. I'm completely oblivious to any of these cartel crimes. It's really within themselves. I'm not going to say that, things don't happen. They do. Tijuana is a gateway. So it's supply and demand, and it's the border that provides that supply and demand, all of it coming to the US because of the demand.
Got it. All right. Let's see. What do you know, or maybe you could just send a link or something. They're asking about the tariff and duty structure for shipments directly to EU companies. So I don't know if that's a quick thing, or maybe you could just send it with the file and we'll post it.
Yeah, it's a great question. Mexico has a lot of favorable trade agreements, specifically with Europe. So if that's something you're interested in, we can work on an analysis to help you understand what the duty rates are. But a lot of those types of questions, it doesn't matter where it comes from. It's all about country of origin. Where's your raw material coming from? What are you going to do in Mexico? How much are you going to assemble or fabricate there? Is it full transformation? So all of those questions and processes will come into play to properly answer that kind of question.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And let's see. The sister company or the sister cities for the U.S. for the Maquiladora border locations, I'm thinking that we certainly have San Diego. Is there any other hot spots that you would
consider for manufacturing? Like I mentioned, Tijuana, Tecate, Mexicali, Juarez, even though Juarez tends to have a negative connotation when people think of it, it's from a security standpoint, it's fine. It's just like Tijuana, and that's also another location. So when you're considering your locations, it really comes down to where is your final product going to be distributed to? Who are you sending it to? Where is your client base at? Are you going to send it back to warehouses, or to is it going to go on FedEx, or where's that final location? What does it look like? Where is it? And then we answer the question, where should you set up in Mexico?
Right. Yeah, makes good sense. One of the attendees answered one of the questions. It said on February 18th, it was $18 pesos to 1 US dollar. With the COVID, it's been in the 24-25 range, so very favorable now. The dollar is strong versus the Mexican peso, so it's a good investment in the previous and current market.
Thank you.
So thank you, Jim, for responding to that. And yes, we are going to provide a the presentation to folks. And I think one last, let's see, I think I will send you any follow-up questions, Veronica, from the presentation, but I think we've answered, the vast majority. It's clearly a popular topic, so thank you very much for doing this today. And I wanted to wrap up by talking about our next set of presentations. So next week we have Robbie Baxter, who's going to be talking about how to create a forever transaction, which basically means how do we get our customers to keep coming back to us without even thinking, which is going to be really quite critical in these times as we emerge from the coronavirus. And then we have, will be listed shortly on our website, but we have confirmed that we're going to have a presentation by Esri on the data, and they're heavily involved in predicting, the coronavirus and how healthcare and medical professionals use that, as well as businesses and opening up. That should be a really interesting predictive forecasting type presentation. That'll be in May. And we also are confirming a distribution and delivery food service company that's going to talk about distribution in this environment. And we have a couple others in the works. So we're continuing to add webinars to our Navigating Through Volatility webinar series. So please stay tuned, and we will we look forward to continuing this process. So I want to thank you again, Veronica, and I hope everyone else has everyone has a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Lisa. Have a good one.
Thank you.